It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Program, thanks so much for being with us. Now, one of the ways that we get to steer government and tell the government what it is allowed to do is with our vote. And thankfully, in Arkansas, we get to vote for judges. And specifically, we get to vote for Arkansas Supreme Court judges. Here is one of those candidates we have on the program and the phone with us, Mr. Kenneth Hixson, who is a candidate for Arkansas Supreme Court. Kenneth, welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you very much. It's Judge Hixson, and appreciate you letting me be on your show.
Yes, Judge, we appreciate it very much. So tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for this Supreme Court seat.
Well, that's a fair question. You know, I'm like everyone else, and I just read the same newspapers and the same blogs, and, you know, it got to a point where I could sense, and I think the public could sense, that we need a change on the Supreme Court. We've had a big change down there with the past 4 or 5 years. You know, Jim Hanna was a chief and a man of character, and Paul Danielson and Robert Brown, Donnie Corbin. We've had a big change since 2012, and it's just gotten to a point where I had some people calling me, encouraging me to run, and finally, literally on the day before the deadline, I threw my hat into the ring because I'm hoping I'm the person that can help restore confidence in the Supreme Court, which I think Arkansans deserve.
So when you say restore confidence, what do you think has happened that has weakened that confidence that the public has or doesn't have?
You know that's a hard question to answer. I don't know any of the inner workings of the Supreme Court. You know, they're on their side of the building, and we're on our side. I've been on Court of Appeals for 5.5 years now, and it's just a feeling that I get, and it's also what I've been hearing around the state. I have literally been in the four corners of the state for the past month, and the complaint that I hear most of all, and I hear it from all four corners, is that the public believes that our Supreme Court has gotten too political. When I ask them what they mean by being too political, it's hard for them to put into words. So it's equally hard for me to put into words, but that is the most common complaint that I hear as I'm driving around the state.
Yeah, you know, and I was just talking about this before our segment, you know, and just in terms of how, for me, as somebody who, I'm a very political guy. I'm, you know, on the far right of the political spectrum, and when I interview judicial candidates, it's always hard because I know you guys can't talk about what could be potential cases in front of you, and I totally understand that. But because it's a nonpartisan thing, it ends up, you know, kind of being difficult. And I try to make these interviews not about a popularity contest, which is the danger of a judicial race. It can kind of tend to go in that direction. And so let me ask you, we're talking with Judge Kenneth Hixson from the Court of Appeals. When you look at our Constitution, the United States Constitution, or the Arkansas Constitution, would you describe yourself more as an originalist, or would you describe yourself more as the Constitution is a living, changing document over time?
You know, so some questions are difficult. that one's not. I think Justice Scalia probably said it best. At one point, he said that it's not alive, it's dead. It's a document. But then he later on softened that blow and said it's enduring. And I think the word enduring is probably the better word. But I would call myself, I'm not into labels, to be honest with you, but I would say I would be an originalist, and I would view the Constitution, any issue that has to interpret the Constitution, try to view it from the same viewpoint as the Founding Fathers. Mm-hmm. That's a little ambiguous to people out there, but that seems to be the most common definition of originalism, and that would be my goal, is to look at it from that point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, and I mean, from just a standpoint of Western civilization and its integrity, the definitions of words are important in law. And I'm not an attorney, but in the legal world, the definitions of those words they mean something. And what those definitions meant in the 18th century, that is what informed their opinions as to what was the best and proper way to move forward when they crafted our laws, when they crafted these documents. And so, I mean, when you put it...
Well, that.
Go ahead.
That's exactly right. And I tell you by way of an analogy, perhaps, and that is whenever you start out, I guess I started out with the King James Version of the Bible, and it has all the these and thous and the proper English. And every few generations, you get a new version of the Bible, and you finally get down to, I think, what they call now is the Living Translation. And every time they translate it, the words change a little bit. And when you change the words, the meaning changes a little bit. So you have to be careful whenever you get new versions of a document that you stay with the original intent.
Mm-hmm.
And the one good thing about the Constitution is that it hasn't changed. Those words mean the same thing now as they did 200 some odd years ago.
Yeah.
And whether that's a proper analogy, that is what comes to mind.
Well, what's funny is I've often seen the contradictory. To me, it's when in the political world, when people who typically are on the left say that the Constitution is a living document, which means that it changes over time. When I was growing up in church, I was told that the Bible was a living document, but the definitions are different. The Bible being a living document, meaning what was written back then still applies to us now, and is still powerful now, right? And that's why it's still
absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, it's weird that when they say living document in the Constitution, it actually means that the text changes as to how it applies to us.
I read another article by Justice Scalia not too long ago, and I thought it was pretty interesting. He said, and this is probably a poor paraphrase, but he said that society changes over the years, and because society changes over the years, our morals or our mores change over the years, and our legislatures change over the years, and therefore our laws change over the years. But the way we view them constitutionally does not. You still view our current laws with those same lenses that the Founding Fathers would have viewed them through 200 some odd years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought they explained that pretty well, that lay people could understand, because constitutional issues can get pretty complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. We're talking with Judge Kenneth Hixson. Now, Judge, I was thinking about what has happened. I guess the last judicial elections, we had some talk after the fact that maybe the people don't need to have the right to elect you guys anymore, and that we need to move to an appointment system with the Arkansas Bar Association combined with the executive branch of our government, the governor's office, making the decisions. And one of the reasons was because they say dark money, which is something that they define. It was just kind of what you were saying earlier, maybe, that they were using the same terms anyway, the politics and everything else. So I'm curious, do you agree with the status quo, which is the people get to pick, or would you support moving to an appointment system?
That's a good question. The appointed judges scheme has worked pretty well in the federal system, and I understand people who support that. The problem that I see with it, and this is just kind of from a layman's point of view, is that every time you read an article in a newspaper about a decision that a federal judge made or a federal appeals court made, within the first or second paragraph, the author of the article inserts who the president who appointed the judge was. And that almost, to me, inserts politics into the appointment scheme. And that has always left me feeling a little uncomfortable. I'll be honest with you, and that campaigning for a statewide race is very difficult, and sometimes I think, is this the best way to do it? But I come down on the side that the people of Arkansas have a right to know their candidates, have a right to know their judges, and have a right to talk with them and learn something about them. And I come down on the side that voting for judges is the best thing for Arkansas. Maybe it's not the best thing for the federal court system.
I really appreciate that's a very thoughtful way to look at it. It seems to me like you're going to have politics involved either way, in either appointment or an electoral process.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you there just on the term politics.
Okay.
We need to keep politics out of the Supreme Court race. It's a nonpartisan race. Now, we somewhat inject politics into it because we go to GOP meetings, we go to Democrat meetings because that's where the voters are. So it's almost a two-edged sword. We want to keep politics out, but yet we go to these meetings to meet the voters. But every time I go out to a GOP meeting or a Democrat meeting, I never use the term Democrat or Republican or conservative or liberal describing myself. I was taught back in 2012 when I ran for the Court of Appeals, just don't say those words because that kind of violates the spirit of a nonpartisan race.
I think some people, though, we're talking with Judge Kenneth Hixson. I think some people, though, associate. I mean, I'm a skeptic. I kind of think a lot of things are political, or most things are, if not all. But I guess over the years, you've heard what has now become a political term, legislating from the bench. And I think there are a lot of people that believe that there have been judicial actions that have essentially made law instead of interpret the law. Likewise, I think there's a movement by the legislature to try to take away some of the judicial branch's responsibility. What are y'all's powers? So can you just talk a little bit about the benefit of a separation of powers and what that means for our government?
Well, it's the separation of powers is what differentiates us from other forms of government. You know, we have the legislative branch and the executive branch, which is political. I mean, but all of our representatives, senators, and our governor and other officers, those are political races, and rightly so. But the judicial system is supposed to be an independent, for sure independent from politics. And a friend of mine told me the other day that he viewed the judicial system, particularly the Supreme Court, as the last bastion of democracy because we interpret the laws. We don't make the laws. I don't know if he used the phrase judicial activism or not. But that's kind of the buzzword these days. Mm-hmm. We don't want judicial activism. But it is just hugely important to me and to most clear-thinking Arkansans that we do not want our judges making the law. Where we see this a lot, at least in the media, is out in California on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They're probably the most famous or infamous, depending which way you look at it, about taking laws and changing them to suit their own philosophy. We are pretty fortunate in Arkansas. We've had some decisions that have the appearance of judicial activism, and I can't tell you one off the top of my head, but our job is to interpret the Constitution and our statute and not to enable or create laws. I tell people on the campaign trail, if you don't like a law, you need to vote in a representative or a senator who feels like you feel and get him to propose a law. That's the way laws are supposed to be changed in a representative democracy and not through the court system.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's where we're going to leave it. Judge Kenneth Hixson, a candidate for the Arkansas Supreme Court. You're currently on the Court of Appeals. I'd love to have you back on, and we can do this again soon, and best of luck to you on the campaign trail.
Hey, I appreciate it very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to your audience.
All righty. Yes, sir. Be safe. Folks, we're going to take a break. This is Conduit News Radio. I'm Paul Harrell, back in just a moment.